Dr. Night Echoes. The phone line crackled. The man on the other end was screaming. He told me his wife had just shot herself. I knew she was probably gone, but I had to give him something to do. I told him to start CPR right away. He was sobbing and shaking. His voice sounded like he was losing his mind. I had to keep my own voice steady and calm. Suddenly, he stopped for a second. I heard a small voice in the background. It was their son. The boy was only about 10 years old. He had just walked into the room. The father was panicked and told the boy to help him. It was a nightmare. I told the boy to find a clean towel. I told him to press it hard against his mother's head. The silence that followed was the worst part. The boy did not cry. He did not scream. He just listened to me. He used his small hands to help his father. I could hear the wet sounds of their work over the phone. The boy was focused on the wound. The father was breaking down completely. I kept telling them what to do. I kept them moving until the police crashed through the front door. They found a pulse. They took her to the hospital. Now I just sit here at my desk. I keep thinking about that boy. I wonder what he saw when he looked down at his own mother. I wonder if he will ever sleep again. The phone rang at 7 a.m. A man answered on the other end. His voice sounded far away and very strange. He told me his wife was hurt. I tried to get more details, but he was barely making sense. I stayed on the line and kept pushing him to talk. Finally, the truth came out in a slow, broken way. He told me they had a fight the day before. He said it happened 8 hours ago. He told me he used a meat tenderizer mallet on her. He hit her over and over until she stopped moving. He said he stood there for a long time afterward. Then he decided he could not live with what he had done. He tried to cut his own throat with a knife. He could not finish the job, so he slit his wrists instead. He said he had been lying there for hours. He lost so much blood that he went into shock. He was drifting in and out of consciousness. He only called 911 when he finally woke up. He sounded like he was fading away as he spoke to me. When the police and medics arrived, the house was silent. They found the wife. She was still breathing, but she was in very bad shape. They rushed her to the hospital immediately. I never heard if she lived or died. I only know that I had to sit there for the rest of my shift, listening to the echo of his voice as he described what he had done. I got a call at 1 a.m. on the other side, little boy. He was crying so hard he could barely talk. I asked him what was wrong. He told me his parents were fighting. He said his dad was angry. He shouted that his dad wanted to throw his mom out the window. I could hear the fight in the background. It was loud and violent. I heard a woman screaming for help. I heard heavy furniture crashing against the walls. I heard the man shouting insults. I needed the address right away. We did not have caller ID back then. A phone trace took a very long time. I begged the boy to tell me where he lived. He was too scared and did not know the street name. I tried to keep him talking. I tried to keep him brave. Then I heard a sound that I will never forget. It was a horrific, long scream. It ended with the sound of glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. Everything went quiet in the room. A few seconds later, my screen started lighting up with new calls. Other operators were taking reports of a woman found in the courtyard. She had fallen from a high window. I sat there in the dark. I knew other people lived in that building. Someone must have heard the fighting. No one had called until it was already over. The little boy stayed on the line for a moment, and then he just hung up. I never knew what happened to him. The phone call came in at noon. A man spoke to me in a flat, hollow voice. He told me he was cleaning his handgun in the living room. He swore the magazine was out, but the gun had gone off anyway. He said he accidentally shot his 16-year-old nephew in the next room. I told him to go to the boy immediately. I needed him to check the wound and start CPR. The man did not move. He told me he could not help. He said the boy was too heavy to move from the bed to the floor. I walked him through the steps. I promised to help him. I shouted at him to try, but he just stood there. He refused to look for the entry wound. He refused to touch the boy at all. I could hear the nephew in the background. It was a wet, jagged sound. The boy was crying and gasping for air. It was the sound of a life leaking away. The man just listened to it too. His voice stayed completely still. There was no shaking, no sobbing, and no regret. He spoke like he was talking about a broken piece of furniture. I stayed on the line for 10 minutes. I heard the boy's gasps get slower and slower until they stopped. The room went silent. The uncle did not say another word. He just waited for the sirens, showing no emotion at all. That boy died alone while his own uncle watched, and I had to listen to every single second of it. The phone rang just after dawn. A woman was screaming on the other end. She sounded like she was losing her grip on reality. She told me her twin daughters were not breathing. I asked her to start CPR while I sent help, but her voice was a high, jagged sound of pure panic. She kept calling their names, but there was no response on the line. I stayed with her for every second until I heard the sirens pull into the driveway. The truth came out later, and it was much worse than I imagined. The family had gone to sleep after a long night. The twins woke up early, wandering the house while everyone else stayed in bed. Their older sister, only 8 years old, found them playing. She thought she was being helpful. She brought them into her own bed and tucked them deep under a thick, heavy blanket. She did not know that she was stealing the air from their lungs. By the time the mother woke up, the silence in the room was absolute. The officers told me the scene was even stranger. When they finally walked into the bedroom, the children were already cold. But the mother had panicked in a way that made no sense. She had dressed the twins in fresh clothes and rubbed baby oil over their skin. She wanted them to look healthy, like they were just sleeping and not gone forever. She wanted them to look alive. No one was charged with a crime, but I cannot stop picturing those small, oil-slicked faces in the dark. The alarm went off at the station, and I took the call immediately. A woman was screaming so loud that it hurt my ears. She told me her house was on fire. The smoke was thick and she could not see anything. Her daughter was trapped in a back room. I told her to get out of the house. She refused to leave without the girl. She tried to run toward the back of the building, but the heat was too intense. I heard the roar of the flames in the background. It sounded like a giant animal eating the wood. The mother cried out that the fire was too high. She could not get through the wall of orange light to reach the room. I was 5 miles away, sitting in a dark room. I was helpless. I had to stay on the line. I heard the daughter's voice for a few seconds. She was calling for her mother. Then, I heard the sound of the ceiling collapsing. The mother let out a scream that I will never forget. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a heart breaking into pieces while she watched the flames. She stood there and watched her child die because there was no other way. That was 5 years ago. I still wake up at night because of those sounds. I close my eyes and I am back on that phone line, listening to the fire burn through a family's life. I cannot stop hearing her cry for help. The phone rang at 3 a.m. A young voice answered on the other side. She sounded like she was only 7 years old. She told me her mother was on the couch and would not wake up. She said her mom was not breathing at all. I asked her for the address. She gave it to me, but it was in the middle of nowhere. I checked the map. The nearest ambulance was 25 minutes away. I knew that was too long for someone who had stopped breathing. I had to tell the girl what to do. She was so small, and her mother was a grown woman. I told her to use one arm and one leg at a time. She had to slide her mother off the couch and onto the floor. I listened to her struggle with the heavy weight of her own parent. She was panting and crying, but she never stopped. Once her mother was on the floor, I taught the child how to push on her chest. She was so brave. I counted the rhythm for her while she worked. There were no neighbors around to help. She did not know her father's phone number. She was totally alone in that house with her dying mother. I kept the count going for 25 minutes. My heart was pounding in my chest. Just as I heard the ambulance sirens in the distance, she screamed that her mom took a breath. When the medics ran inside, she was finally awake. I cried like a baby when I hung up. I have never been more relieved in my life. The phone rang in the middle of my shift. I answered and heard a small voice on the other side. She was about 8 years old. She was screaming and crying so hard that I could barely hear her words. She kept repeating that her daddy was dead. I could hear 2 other little girls crying in the background. It was a chorus of pure, absolute terror. I checked our map. New calls were flooding in from the same street. Neighbors were reporting gunshots. I tried to talk to the girl, but she was stuck in a loop of panic. I knew what happened before she could explain. 3 men had broken into their home, thinking it was empty. They rang the doorbell just to be sure. Their father opened the door and startled them. They shot him instantly. The mother ran into the hallway to see what was happening. They shot her too. The men ran away. They left 3 sisters aged 8 to 12 alone with their dying parents. I was not allowed to hang up. I had to stay on the line until help arrived. I listened to that girl for 6 minutes and 37 seconds. I heard her sobbing for her parents while I waited for the sirens to get closer. It felt like hours. When the police finally burst through the door, The silence was heavy. The mother somehow lived, but that night changed everything for those children. I still think about that little girl. I hope she finally stopped crying. The phone rang at 4 a.m. on a quiet Sunday. I picked up, expecting a drunk dial or a wrong number. Instead, I heard the thin, shaky voice of a child. She sounded tiny, barely 6 years old. She told me there was a man in her backyard making loud, wet noises. I asked her where her parents were. She started to cry and said the man had them in the grass. She said they were not moving at all. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. I told her to hide and stay quiet. Suddenly, her tone shifted. It went flat, completely void of emotion. She whispered that the man knew she was on the phone. He had stood right by the back window and stared directly at her. She said he was the one who told her to call the police. He was laughing while he said it. I heard the back door creak open. The sound was slow and heavy, like someone was taking their time. She whispered that he was inside the kitchen now. I heard the muffled sound of heavy boots hitting the linoleum floor. The girl stopped talking. There was a sharp, quick intake of breath, then a loud thud. The phone hit the ground. For 10 minutes, I listened to the sound of steady, rhythmic breathing through the line. It wasn't the girl's breath. It was someone much larger, someone waiting. When the officers arrived, they found the house empty. They never found the girl, her parents, or the man. Sometimes, I still hear that breathing in my sleep. The phone line crackled with static. A man was screaming at the top of his lungs. He told me he found a relative lying on the ground. The man was outside, deep in the middle of nowhere. He said his relative was bleeding badly from the head. I already had the police and fire trucks moving. I told him help was on the way. He would not stop yelling at me. Every time I asked a question, he just shouted about the blood. Suddenly, the man stopped shouting. He started to sob. He told me the victim had stopped breathing. I took a deep breath to stay calm. I needed him to focus. I told him how to start CPR. He followed my instructions well. He pushed hard on the chest for a long time. After 300 pushes, the relative let out a shallow breath. I felt a wave of relief. Then, I told him to get a towel. I needed him to press it against the head wound to stop the bleeding. He refused. He was shaking and sobbing. He told me he would not leave the body. I begged him to go find a cloth. I told him it was necessary. He just kept repeating that he would not walk away. He was a broken man. Finally, the police arrived at the house. I asked the man to confirm they were there. He told me they had just walked up. I was about to end the call. Then I heard a cop shout. The officer said, "Sir, I need you to step away from that gun on the ground."